Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
This time, we're going to look at something pretty spooky, witchcraft.
Ooh, witchcraft.
Yeah, but not just like, generic witchcraft. We're
Mm.
going real deep on this one. We're going to the Duchy of Württemberg in early modern Europe.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
And we're going to focus on this really fascinating concept of maleficium. You heard of that?
Maleficium. I can't say I have.
Well, it's basically like the evil twin of magic, using it to, like, inflict harm or, cause all sorts of trouble.
Ah, I see. So we're talking about the dark side of magic then.
Exactly. And to guide us through all this, we've got excerpts from this great book by Edward Bever. It's called The Realities of Witchcraft and Popular Magic in Early Modern Europe.
Catchy title.
Yeah. And he does some amazing work with actual court records and, like, historical analysis to show how witchcraft accusations worked. What people actually believed about magic and how these beliefs played out in real life.
So it's like a deep dive into the social history of witchcraft.
Exactly. And what's so cool is that Bever takes us beyond those kind of simplistic good versus evil narratives. We often see, it's not just about witches with pointy hats cackling over cauldrons.
Right. We want to understand how real people experience this fear of magic, right?
Exactly. And like how it shaped their relationships and their communities. And one of the things that really struck me is that Bever emphasizes how much power words had in this whole system.
Words. So we're not just talking about like spells and incantations.
No, those were definitely part of it. But even something as simple as a curse, we think of those as like superstitious nonsense. But Bever suggests they could actually have like real physical effects.
Whoa, hold on. How could just words do that?
Well, think about it in a society where everyone believes in witchcraft. The fear and the social pressure that comes with a curse that can be incredibly powerful.
Oh, I see. So it's like the psychological impact of being cursed that could manifest in physical symptoms.
Exactly. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And Bever gives this really crazy example from the court, records this story of Anna Gebhard and Conrad Streich.
Okay, lay it on me.
So Anna seems like she was a bit of a character that she had a sharp tongue. And at Conrad's wedding feast, she made some pretty colorful jokes at his expense.
Oh, no, at his own wedding.
Yeah, and you're not going to believe what happened next. So shortly after the wedding, Conrad starts experiencing impotence.
Oh, wow. That's unfortunate.
Right. And he is convinced that Anna's teasing, which he basically saw as a curse, was the cause.
So even something as seemingly harmless as a joke, if it's seen through the lens of witchcraft, could have a profound impact.
It really shows you the power of suggestion, right?
Totally. And the thing is, Bever argues that this power could be even stronger in situations of like really intense social conflict.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, he talks about these cases where people, they're already primed to believe in witchcraft, and then they have these like really vivid experiences that blur the lines between reality and imagination.
Like they actually believe they're being attacked by magic, even if there's no physical evidence.
Exactly. There's this one case involving Agatha Weil, this elderly woman who was accused of using a magical salve to hurt her enemies.
A magic salve.
Yeah, and get this, some of her alleged victims, they actually reported feeling these attacks, even though according to the records, there was no evidence of any physical contact.
Wow. So it's like their belief in witchcraft was so strong that they were actually experiencing physical sensations even if nothing was really happening.
It really makes you wonder how much of this was genuine belief, how much was social pressure, and maybe even how much was just a way of explaining the unexplainable.
Right. It's like we're trying to understand a completely different way of seeing the world.
Exactly. And I think that's what Bever is trying to do with this book, to get us to think beyond our modern assumptions about witchcraft.
Yeah, because it wasn't just about, the stereotypical image of the witch we have.
Right. And one thing that surprised me is that Bever points out that the devil, like the big bad guy of witchcraft, wasn't always the central figure in these cases.
Real? I always thought the devil was like the star of the show when it came to witchcraft.
That's what I thought, too. But Bever's research suggests that in a lot of cases, the focus wasn't on some grand pact with the devil. It was about the belief in harmful magic itself and how that played out in very real, often very personal conflicts between people.
So it's less about selling your soul and more about like settling scores with your neighbor.
Yeah, in many cases, it was about those everyday tensions and rivalries. And to really understand this, we have to consider the context of late 16th century Württemberg.
Okay, paint me a picture.
Imagine a time of overpopulation, economic hardship, widespread uncertainty about the future.
Sounds pretty stressful.
It was, and in times like these, people are more likely to look for someone to blame someone to explain why bad things are happening.
And if you were already an outsider in some way,
You are an easy target, and as we're going to see this is where the accusations against women, particularly older women, become a really dark and complex chapter in this story.
Okay, now you've got me hooked.
Lord, time.
I can't wait to hear more about this. But before we move on to part 2, let's just take a second to appreciate how Bever challenges our preconceptions about witchcraft.
Yeah, it's a reminder that this wasn't just about the supernatural. It was about the very real ways in which fear, belief, and social pressures can shape human behavior.
And how those forces can be used for both good and evil.
Exactly. So stay tuned for part 2, where we'll delve even deeper into the world of witchcraft in early modern Württemberg.
So we've been talking about how witchcraft accusations in Württemberg weren't just about like some abstract fear of magic. They were tied to like real conflicts and anxieties.
Yeah, and we can't forget about the religious context. This was the Reformation, a time of huge upheaval in Christianity.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. How did the Reformation impact all this?
It had a big impact on how witchcraft was understood and prosecuted, especially in Württemberg.
Okay, tell me more.
So one key figure is Johann Brenz. He was like a leading reformer in the region.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that he kind of challenged some of the typical views on witchcraft.
Really? How so?
Well, he argued against this idea that witches got their power directly from the devil through like a formal pact.
So no like signing your name in blood in a dark ritual.
Not exactly. Brenz saw witchcraft more as a delusion, like a deception by the devil, but not necessarily a conscious agreement.
So it's more like the devil whispering in your ear, planting bad ideas, but you're not really fully aware of what you're doing.
That's one way to look at it. And this idea had some interesting implications for how witches were dealt with.
How so?
Well, if witchcraft wasn't like a direct result of a demonic pact, then it was possible for witches to repent and be reconciled with the church.
That's a lot different from the burn them all mentality we often associate with witch hunts.
Exactly. And you can actually see Brenz's influence in the early witchcraft trials in Württemberg.
So there was more emphasis on like rehabilitation.
Yeah, at least initially. But as the fear of witchcraft grew in the late 16th century, things started to change.
Okay, it feels like we're about to enter a dark turn here. What happened?
Well, a bunch of factors played a role. One big one was the publication of the Malleus Maleficarum in 1486.
Oh yeah, The Hammer of Witches. That book was a big deal.
Yeah, it had a huge impact all over Europe, and Württemberg was no exception.
Okay, remind me what was so bad about it.
It basically laid out this really specific and terrifying demonology of witchcraft.
Like a guide to hunting witches.
Basically, it argued that witches were inherently dangerous, they'd made pacts with the devil, and they were actively working to undermine Christian society.
So much darker than Brenz's view.
Yeah, a lot less nuance, and this shift in thinking really impacted how trials were conducted.
I can imagine things got a lot harsher.
Yeah. Torture, which had been used sparingly before, became a lot more common.
To force confessions, I guess.
Exactly. The goal was to get the accused to admit their pact with the devil, and under torture, people will say anything to make the pain stop.
So it's like a self-perpetuating cycle. The fear of witches leads to harsher tactics, which leads to more confessions, which just fuels the fear even more.
Precisely, and remember, this is all happening against a backdrop of social and economic turmoil in Württemberg.
Right. People are struggling. They're looking for someone to blame.
And the Malleus Maleficarum basically provides that scapegoat, the witch.
So we have this pre-existing fear of witches, then you add in social and economic instability, and then you throw this book into the mix that demonizes witches and encourages brutal interrogation. It's like a recipe for disaster.
And as the trials intensified, so did the types of accusations. We start to see more emphasis on this idea of the witch's Sabbath.
Oh, yeah, the secret gatherings where witches fly through the night to meet with the devil.
Exactly. And these accounts often reflect elements of like folklore and popular beliefs.
So it's like they took existing fears and then just blew them up into something even more sinister.
And for people in early modern Württemberg, this wasn't just a scary story. This was a real threat that could explain anything from illness to bad crops to social unrest.
And if you believe that your neighbor is attending these Sabbaths and maybe using magic to harm you,
you'd be terrified, and you might be more likely to accuse them even if there was no proof.
So we have this perfect storm brewing a society on edge, a changing religious landscape, and this influential book that just fuels the witch hunt. Where do we go from here? I'm guessing this doesn't have a happy ending.
You're right, and as we'll see in the final part of this deep dive, the witch hunts didn't just impact individuals. They had far-reaching consequences for all of Württemberg.
We've been talking about all this like big picture stuff with the witch hunts. But it's easy to forget that these were accusations between real people. You
Oh,
know?
yeah, people who lived and worked together.
Right, and Bever really brings that home. Like, he digs into these court records that show accusations happening within families, like even between spouses.
Wow, that's going to be intense.
Yeah, imagine the paranoia in a house where you think your partner is practicing maleficium.
It's like suspicion taken to a whole new level.
And Bever finds cases of husbands accusing their wives of using magic to, like, poison them or control their minds or even cause impotence.
No, wow.
And these accusations, they often came up in the context of, like, existing marital problems, you know, jealousy, money troubles, infidelity.
So witchcraft almost became a way to explain or even weaponize those problems.
Exactly. If you're already mad at your spouse, accusing them of witchcraft could be a way to control them or silence them or even get rid of them.
And remember, this is a society where women had very little power, so accusing a woman of witchcraft could be a way to just reinforce those power structures.
That's a double whammy, you know?
Absolutely. And it wasn't just husbands accusing wives. Bever also found cases where children accused their parents of witchcraft.
Oh, gosh, that's even more disturbing.
It really is, and it raises so many questions about, like, manipulation and coercion. Were these kids really believing this, or were they being pressured?
Especially since children were basically seen as their father's property.
Yeah, right. So it's clear that the witch hunts weren't always about finding the truth. They could be used as a tool in personal conflicts.
With terrible consequences for the accused, whether they were guilty or not.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that power can be abused in so many ways.
So a pretty grim picture, but were there any voices of reason in all of this? Did anyone push back against the witch hunts?
That's what I appreciate about Bever's work. Even amidst all this darkness, he highlights these voices of dissent. People who questioned the accusations, who spoke out against torture, who offered different explanations for what was happening.
It's good to know that not everyone just blindly accepted all this.
Yeah, and these were often ordinary people, but their courage in speaking out really mattered.
It's like those little glimmers of hope in a really dark time.
Exactly. And as the 17th century went on, that skepticism toward witchcraft grew even among the educated elite who had once supported the hunts.
So it's like society started to realize that they'd gone too far.
Yeah, the trials declined and eventually the witch hunts faded away, but the lessons of that dark chapter, they're still relevant today.
For sure, it shows how easily fear and prejudice can lead to innocent people being persecuted.
And it reminds us how important critical thinking and empathy are. You know, we have to be willing to question things and speak out against injustice.
So well said. This deep dive has been way more than just a history lesson.
It's a reminder of how fragile justice can be and how powerful beliefs can be.
And how important it is to be vigilant, you know, to make sure that history doesn't repeat itself.
Exactly. So as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a question to think about. What are the witch hunts of our own time? You know, where do we see fear and prejudice being used to target people? And how can we make sure that doesn't happen again?
That's a really powerful question, and one that we all need to grapple with. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the dark world of witchcraft in early modern Württemberg.